Hi everyone, welcome to my P7 revision FAQ. It has been some weeks and this is prepared in response to some of those observations I had while meeting my P7 full-time students in campus. Right, so on Wildy, Chia, thank you for watching. To provide some, additional information, some additional things that you should watch out for as you prepare for the exams, right, in the coming um, weeks. Okay, firstly, make sure that you go back and remember FRS. Some of the important FRS will be like revenues, leases, impairment, provision, inventory, and subsequent events, and so on. Right? They come from P2, right? Obviously, right? A student asks, do you need to remember the RSA, IAS, and FRS numbers? Now that's the same as SSA, SFRS numbers to Singapore students. Now, you don't need to remember these numbers. However, the contents of these standards are important. Now, this is mentioned in the ACCA website. You can verify that if you want to. Right, just don't waste too much effort trying to remember the numbers. They're not essential. The content is important. Like for example, say for instance inventory. What is the main thing about inventory? Now, inventory should be tested for uh, should be tested using the lower of cost or NRV method, right? So you need to know what each of these standards specifically require, right? But thankfully you don't need to perform the computation, right? Why do you need to know what each of the standards require? Because questions will likely test you on what procedures will be required, what evidence would you need to get, right? In regards to each of these items. Now, one more thing. Questions on FRS are frequently featured. In fact, I would say almost always featured in question 2, 3, or 4, right? So it makes it very worthwhile to invest time to study this and make sure that you get it right. Typically, questions on FRS will test you on stuff like um, comments, right? Comment on the issue, and then you need to comment on the ethical, quality control issues, professional issues even. So make sure that you go through the uh, exam papers on this, at least the June and December 2017, and if you can, June and December 2016 papers on this FRS questions. Technique. As the exams near, I had the privilege and opportunity to meet many of my full-time students at campus. I'm very grateful to them because meeting them allowed me to understand a lot about their difficulties. Now, and especially this thing about good writing techniques, I still see some students with very poor writing techniques, and that's very concerning. I mean, don't overlook the importance of good writing techniques. It makes a difference between a pass and a fail. you know Big difference. And it's absolutely essential for question one, which is the case study. Now if you fail to answer question one to your best effort, you run a very high risk of failing the exams. So spare no effort at getting a writing technique right. you know that helps you in question one, and that is absolutely important. Don't forget obvious things for your question one, like emphasizing what is the risk that you have identified from the case study. For example, the risk is, I always tell my students, start by saying the risk is assets are overstated, the risk is profits are overstated, for example. Now it's very simple. It beats having to write like lines and lines of what the issue is, but you don't end off by telling the examiner what risk you have identified. You lose marks. But I marked quite a few scripts, and students could explain the issue very well, but they fail to point out what is the risk underlying, especially when the question asks for evaluate the risk of material misstatement, right? And you have to exactly point out what is the risk of material misstatement. you know and not forgetting, even early adoption of accounting standards do give rise to audit risk. Don't overlook that. So risk doesn't always come from like nature of business. It can arise from adopting the accounting standards for the first time. These can give rise to audit risk. All right, easy marks. Now, also while we have discussed, in fact, even my uh, with my students, it is a common trend for exams to feature something on audit report and opinion. Now, I would say that it's ironic that these are some of the easiest questions to score at, literally, right? And like the exams report often point out that this question on audit report and opinion are often poorly attempted because many students can't seem to identify the distinction between a qualified opinion and adverse opinion. Now it's ironic, because it is that simple. Okay, and I suppose that one of the reasons why many avoided this question on audit report and opinion is that there is a lack of preparation on this area. Now, for purpose of your exams, you should not spare effort preparing for the topic of audit report and opinion. They can be very easy, right? Don't worry about the complicated language, they are really simple. You just have to get yourself to sit down and go through the December and June 2017 papers, questions on audit opinion. They are relatively easy, right? Because they test mainly on your understanding about what's the difference between the two opinions and which opinion applies in the case. Right. Now, I met my students face to face, and after I explained to them, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's that simple, no? Right? Not complicated." Like, perhaps to give you some idea about how to identify a qualified opinion. Now, a qualified opinion basically is identified by the except for wording, right? How do you remember that? Okay, now I often share this with my students, and I think it's just a very simple way to remember what is qualified opinion. Take for instance, you went to a restaurant, uh, and then it's an expensive restaurant. Your friend asked you, "How do you find the food?" You told a friend, "Oh, all is well. The cafe, the food in the restaurant is wonderful." And you said, "Except for the quality of the service, if not all else is great. Except for the waiting time. If not, the quality of the food is wonderful. The experience is wonderful." That is a qualified opinion. The qualified opinion basically is where, all else in the statements are fine, except for inventory perhaps, or except for valuation of the goodwill, right? So, a qualified opinion basically impacts one or a few elements in the statements, but generally it doesn't impact on the reliability of the statements, right? Now, I put that simply in, in simple language. Of course, you still need to read your notes to fully understand what we mean by qualified opinion, right? So, but basically, a qualified opinion is one where, uh, it's identified by the keywording except for. Okay, and using the restaurant example is a very easy way to remember what is a qualified opinion. Now, an adverse opinion, on the other hand, is very significant. It affects various aspects of the statements to such an extent that the statements are not dependable to any extent, right? So one is very serious, whereas the other qualified opinion is uh, not that serious. It's still serious, but not that serious because it impacts on a few areas in the statements, right? Do study that. Do attempt the questions in December and June 2017. That says it all. Finally, as you rush to prepare for the exams, don't forget some other commonly overlooked areas, such as, I find it surprising, I mean, when I was talking to my students not long ago, uh, there is this common misconception that risk of material misstatement means that it must be certain values being overstated or understated. Now, it doesn't have to be misstated inventory and property values. It doesn't have to be that. Risk of material misstatement can lie in inadequate disclosure of related party transactions, for example. Some transactions may appear to be below the materiality threshold, but don't forget, they are material due to the nature. For example, share capital is one where it is material due to its nature and not the quantum, right? And don't forget, materiality threshold is a dynamic threshold, it's not static, right? So be very conscious about these. These are very obvious things, right? So some of those things that I've observed, right? I hope that helps you to uh, perform better in the exams and avoid these problems. Okay, finally, all the best. So to quote Thomas Edison, I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that do not work. To conclude, do not fret over questions that you can't solve. Put your mind at it. If problems are so easy to solve, then there is little value in solving them. It is the difficulty that persists which gives great value to the lessons underlying. A student once pushed the table in frustration, claiming he couldn't do it. Again, why should we feel stress and frustration? Because the mind is adapting and you're evolving to be better. Put it simply, if it is so easy, there is nothing much for you to learn and gain out of this endeavor, right? And don't fret, help is always an email away, right? Drop me an email or at wildy231@gmail.com, or you can always make an appointment to see me in school. I mean, if problems seem too great, right? And I really don't think that you have to worry too much. Just relax. Try to go through the process, go through those critical topics like audit risk, business risk, right? And make sure that you get yourself familiarized with the FRS. That's very important, right? Go through these, right? And then don't forget the audit report and opinion. Look through the past two exam papers, or maybe even four if you can, right? Run through them. Make sure that you appreciate the process of answering these questions. All right. So these are some pointers that I've given, and which I've observed. I hope that these also help you to achieve good grades as well. Okay. And meantime, I'm Wildy Chia, and I teach the paper P7, right, as well as F8, and I wish you all the best. And whatever you do, don't get stressed. Right. Take care. All the best.